I'm going to record our discussion, but just for our benefit this time. I did have the thought. I wonder whether, because I'm now putting the I'm not sure whether I've said this to everyone, but I have put the talk and the meditation from last time on my public YouTube channel, because it occurred to me that I could keep these and they can be reused, and they can be made available to more people. So that's what I'm planning to do. But I thought I'd better just check with everyone whether or not you're happy for me to share the discussions as well, or whether, we can keep those private to ourselves. I don't know what people feel about it. Yeah, perhaps I'll ask you that question after you've had the discussion, in case you say things that you might not want to make public. That's totally up to you.
By me, and strangely enough, I managed to get those by sending your email to my phone. So I was able to see our discussions last week, but I couldn't see the other one. So it's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well, we'll see if we can resolve the problem. But if it's to do with your internet connection, it'll be different at different times. So I would try it, a couple of times. Yeah. But if it's something else, then maybe you could ask Nitin or myself for a bit of help. But I think, Nitin, I said it might be better for Dee to consult you, because I cannot control her computer from my screen. Whereas if you set up a Zoom call and do that, you can. I've got an Apple Mac, so I can't control a PC from
it. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, just a thought. Okay, so yeah, just open that up for discussion. What are people's reactions to A, to my talk, and B, to the two video talks? Anybody like to share something?
I was wondering, when we were talking about the left and right hemisphere of the brain, it's in relation to us as human beings. Many sentient beings, particularly those with brains, have that feature as well.
Yes.
The left and right hemisphere.
Yes.
As part of this creation, are the human beings physiologically limited? Okay, we have gone to the excessive control of the left hemisphere,
yes,
at the cost of the right. But physiologically, until the species evolve to have a brain form that promotes more than just a small link between the two hemispheres.
Well, that's not the direction that evolution has been going in. It's been going in the opposite direction. Our brains are much more divided than many other species. Now, I don't know about whales and dolphins. They're always very interesting to look at, because, my personal opinion, they're more intelligent than we are.
Yeah.
And they seem to have, interestingly, very, very deep intuitive awareness, possibly. And I'm sure they have a kind of intelligence that we don't even understand what it is. It may be as different from either of our kind. We have two kinds of intelligence, okay, which you've been talking about. They may have another one, which is we don't understand at all. They have now one of the things that Ian McGilchrist mentions is that one of the things that's distinctive about the human physiology of the human brain is we have very large frontal lobes. But the frontal lobes of the dolphins and whales are much bigger than ours. So those they are sort of connected with very sophisticated, evolutionarily late forms of intelligence to do with things like empathic understanding of other people. So they have that in spades, more than we do. So we aren't necessarily the peak of the evolutionary journey. But I think what's happened with humans, we can integrate the two. Even though we have just this corpus callosum is very small, we have not very many connections. But I think that this is why spiritual practice is so difficult to attain enlightenment. Or this is not that's why, but looked at in one way, that might be part of the reason why it's so difficult, because these two kinds of awareness, two kinds of intelligence, are very sharply separated in humans, and the connection between them is a bit tenuous, but nevertheless, we can integrate them. An enlightened person integrates them perfectly. So it is possible. And the way that I'm seeing it, and this is, I guess it's pretty speculative, we're speculating about future evolution, but we have another kind of evolution, not physiological evolution. We are able to evolve culturally. And this is what I think is happening, that ability to integrate the two sides of the brain perfectly became a possession of our collective human culture around about the 6th century BC with the Buddha and the other people that were not only the Buddha. I mean, there were very highly enlightened people in several parts of the world. Actually, a lot of people in India. In India at that time, not just the Buddha, but many other people had gone to a very, very high stage of meditation. But it wasn't just individuals, it became part of the culture, and the Dharma, spread in different forms. And what I think is happening now, and Eckhart Tolle talks about this as well, is that state of integration, which we call enlightenment, which used to be, it was known about by a lot of people in Buddhist countries. They knew, the Buddha, they maybe wouldn't have been able to, most people wouldn't have been able to explain very clearly what that was. A lot of people would have understood it intellectually, but wouldn't have actually the meditational experience. And just a very few people would have that experience. But I think he believes that deep awareness, that more enlightened form of awareness is spreading, and it's accelerating. It's reaching a tipping point. And I mentioned last time the idea of collective consciousness, that my consciousness is not just my consciousness. As we're together on this call, there is a group consciousness of this group. And that group consciousness is part of a bigger one, until it comes to the whole world. And I'll talk about that next week, about Gaia, because, we go that way and we think, yes, okay, so humanity has a collective mind. Right? We talk about the mind of the West and the mind of the East and so on. But it isn't just human beings either. So if my mind is not just my separate individual mind, but it's part of something bigger, that something bigger must be the consciousness, at least, of the whole planet. All the life forms on the planet are connected, intimately connected as one single web of life. And that has its own collective awareness. So that is evolving too. So, but Eckhart Tolle, he said some surprising things, because, one thing I love about Eckhart Tolle, and he actually made an amusing remark about it in a teaching I heard recently. He said that, before he wrote The Power of Now, which made him extremely famous, world famous, nobody had any idea that he was, he wasn't, nobody knew he was at all. And he said people just found him completely ordinary, because he's, and he said, the only thing is, some people would say, oh, you've got to go and hear him. He's so ordinary. And he hears a little bit about the Dalai Lama, it is striking. Somebody in such an eminent position, more than eminent, isn't it? He's the object of worship for millions. And yet he comes over just very, very matter of fact, ordinary, everyday. So when Eckhart Tolle said, as I heard him say recently, that he thinks maybe within 100 years, it won't be necessary for us to speak to each other, because the whole of humanity will be telepathically connected. When somebody who's as down to earth and matter of fact as Eckhart Tolle says something like that, now take notice. Maybe it's not just a completely mad idea. Maybe something very profound is happening to the evolution of our minds. And again, this connects up with what I'm going to be talking about next week. But yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, just to come back a bit more down to earth, Nitin, with your question, I think it is more a question of cultural evolution than physiological evolution. If as a whole society, civilization, we can master this art of integrating the left and right side of our brain, then there's a lot of hope. If we can't, then, you know, and we keep on going down with this divided route, then we're in very big trouble. But I'm optimistic. Yeah.
I see it as a kind of an evolution from single cell organisms. We are formed of multiple cells, and we have groups of cells doing certain function. They are functioning beyond thought and beyond speech. There is communication going on between every organ in our body. Which together, that we call I. And then we feel I is just that little brain in there. And we forget the function of all the parts working together. And now I think this crisis is forcing us to come together. And ironically, we are using the power of the left brain to bring people together, i.e. the computer, the internet.
Although the computers both, you know, I mean, why we're able to talk to each other is not just because of computers, it's also because of the internet and the World Wide Web. Now, the World Wide Web particularly is interesting because I think it's a very right brain idea. The guy who invented it, and anybody else remember his name? He's an Englishman.
Tim Berners-Lee.
Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee. That's
a Unitarian.
He's a what?
He was a Unitarian.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. And his idea was that you know, just as the brain does not work like a computer at all, in that every cell of the brain is able to communicate with every other cell. It's a network. So, you know, all the parts of the brain, it's very interesting, actually. I keep thinking I really should get an up-to-date book on the structure of the brain and find out a bit more about it. But, you know, I think his father was an academic, possibly, you know, in that field anyway. He knew that the brain has this particular aspect that each cell of the brain has about 10,000 connections to other cells. Some of them are in remote parts of the brain. So it's incredibly interconnected. Whereas a computer, it's fundamentally, you know, Jill Bolte-Taylor talks about serial processor and parallel processor. The computer that you're looking at me through is a serial processor. Parallel processing is a very kind of arcane, recondite kind of aspect of computing. But Tim Berners-Lee's thought was, oh, well, we could connect computers around the world and we would create a kind of, you know, structure, information processing structure like the brain. So that's a very very right brain idea. It's a creative idea. And there's Ian McGilchrist mentioned, you know, mathematics and science, we think of them as left brain, but actually, especially mathematics, is extremely creative science, and the right brain is very, very much involved in, you know, great mathematicians are very much right brain people. They can use their left brain very well, so well, otherwise they couldn't do mathematics at all. But it's the right brain that makes the fantastic leap of intuition to, aha, you know. Right, left brain is a bit more plonk plonk, you know, one step after another. Good at arithmetic, but it's not so good at some other kinds of mathematics. Interesting. Anyway, yeah. But you're right. I mean, it is the unification of the two that's important, Nitin. And you know, because we've had wonderful right brain people, and Eckhart Tolle is very fond of speaking about holy men in India, you know, and women as well, who, some of them, they just don't do anything at all. They just sit there.
Well,
People make
although
offerings to them, they feed them, they understand that they're holy, and that those people are holy in the right brain. And they are valued in that society. They're not valued much in this society. And you look at, in this society, the amount of attention that's given to arts in like the national curriculum. Well,
when we actually,
Susan, my wife, who's an artist, pointed out that the arts generate as much, wealth for this country as almost anything else. I mean, one of our biggest exports is our creativity, even though the schools are trying their best to suppress it. We're a very creative nation, actually. We have lots of good right brain thinkers and artists and musicians and so on. But it's the two coming together that's important, and not just in individuals, but in the society as a whole. So I do have a lot of optimism that what we're going through now is a transition of which will be quite traumatic, because they are, when one phase of civilization comes to an end and a new one is happening, it's quite a traumatic transition time. But what's on the other side, which I'm more and more interested in, I feel this integrative consciousness may well be something that's no longer just, I think it's more than just a few individuals. It's a worldwide movement, but it's still not the mainstream. When it becomes the mainstream, when it becomes the main way of awareness in our whole civilization, then things will change very profoundly. And this is actually the very last thing that Jill Bolte Taylor says. If we could all learn to move between our left brain awareness and our right brain awareness and integrate the two, then she said, I have a vision this could create a beautiful, peaceful, harmonious world. And it's very moving the way she talks about it, because it's someone who had an incredibly powerful experience of it, and she talks about it so vividly. Ian McGilchrist also, I think, talks about it very eloquently and interestingly. And, in the second part of his book, he's got a really interesting account of how European civilization and other civilizations he mentions as well, how they developed and how that relates to this question. So I think it's a, very interesting and important area. Anything else?
You were saying about the curriculum, because when I was still in teaching, and that's now 20 years ago, there was a vital part that nobody really wanted to have anything to do with, but it was a vital part of the curriculum called PSHE, Personal, Social and Health Education. And it covered everything about people caring for each other, looking out for each other, being all of these things, being aware of what was going on. And it was virtually dropped from the curriculum over the last 20 years. And then they've realized, I think it was just a few years ago, I was told that this was coming back in again, because they'd realized that there was a whole group of people that had gone through the educational system without this idea of looking after everybody within the group, not just those who can achieve, and not just being the total academics all the time, that there was another side to human nature. So it was good in a way that I was pleased that it was actually coming back in, because it was one of the things that I valued a great deal in our teaching, especially people with learning difficulties. They were actually more in tune with it than people from ordinary schools would have been,
Pardon the pun, but I would have thought it was a no-brainer. We need we need to teach children about how to behave towards one another. The fact that that's been seen as dispensable seems to me to be a symptom of almost complete left brain dominance, the right brain getting completely ignored altogether. And I think, I don't know what's the situation now. I used to be a little bit involved in it, by the way, because I worked for some years for an organization called the Leeds Development Education Centre And they were very involved in the PSHCE. Interestingly, one of the methodologies that they used, there are some that you're probably familiar with, like circle time and things like that. But one of them is called Philosophy for Children. You know, philosophy is one of those disciplines that's very much about connecting the two halves. It's often done just with the left brain, and then it's terrible. I hate it. But you know, it should be an integrative thing. Yes. Anybody else like to? I'm looking at you, Claire, because you know I've had a few conversations with you about this, and I don't know if it's acceptable for me to share this with people, but I have said you're somebody that I perceive as having a very strong, you know, right brain awareness. And when you said at the beginning you couldn't get into your left brain, you know, I almost made me laugh, because I'm thinking, well, that's Claire. You know?
Really, it takes some doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm in a very contemplative state at the moment, I think.
Yes.
How things are.
Yes.
And I've reflected on in the past how traumatic and awful things have happened, and how gold has come from those difficulties, and wisdom has come from those difficulties. So I keep going back to the reflection, this is part of our evolution. If we don't get too involved in preciousness of perhaps ourselves, what we think, you know, allowing every discussion, everything to arise, and just being able to be compassionate with that, actually. Because I've heard a lot of different things.
Oh dear.
It's made me more contemplative and maybe a lot quieter than I usually am.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think some of us share that. I certainly do. I was pushed into a more contemplative state sometime before the corona broke out, because I was quite ill for a month and couldn't do very much. And interestingly, I couldn't, you know, my left brain was quite sort of was quite sort of deactivated. I couldn't really do that kind of busy thinking either. So, but I think it is, a lot of people are talking about this, and I think it's absolutely right, Claire, you know, that it may be, and Maggie shared that beautiful poem about it, that you know, that this, two poems actually, both with rather the similar message, that this is kind of a wake-up call for us to remember our contemplative side and our compassionate side, which is also connected. And I think one of the things, you know, we need to beware of getting stuck in a system of ideas, a closed system of ideas. And that is very much the characteristic of the left brain. You know, it has its representation of reality, and it believes that's what reality is. So ideologies are left brain things, you know, they come from an inspirational moment of insight from the right brain, and then somebody works out that great detail as a system that covers every possibility, and anything that doesn't fit is pushed into the box. If it doesn't fit, it's made to fit, you know. And people, you know, when we talk about denial, I mean, I think about, you know, the Flat Earth Society, for example, you know. That's a good one. Yeah, and you know, I have to say, you know, that the Republican Party in America is another one, isn't it? But any system of ideas like that is a closed system that doesn't allow any alternative, and we're all guilty of it. So let's not point the fingers somewhere else. You know, when we get into an argument with somebody, we know that our point of view is right and theirs is wrong, and that's the left brain. And the right brain.
I think with that, a lot of it is about, it's not necessarily that we think our left brain or for me anyway, somebody's, I'm right and they're not right. I think what we all really could benefit from is being really heard and listened to.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that if our mind is open to hearing another point of view, then we have to let go of our own idea being a closed system, don't we? As if, I know how things are. And as if I recognize, well, maybe I don't know how things are, maybe this person's experience has got something to teach me, and then I can, okay, well, let me just put my filters down, and hear what they're saying. And even though it might be quite strange, the right brain is able to take in a new vision of how things are. The left brain finds that extremely difficult. And I must give a bit of a warning here. It is a little bit hazardous talking about the left brain thinks this, the right brain thinks that. It's just a shorthand way of talking, and sometimes it may not be wholly accurate. But we don't want to get stuck in that idea.
I didn't know that dolphins had a bigger frontal lobe, so I'm really joyous to hear that. Because they do have this wealth and beauty about them. And from that one of the bit of the video that I watched that I had time to squeeze in earlier was that he was talking about the frontal brain being there to inhibit.
Yes.
And which I thought was interesting. So I was imagining if I was a dolphin and I had a bigger frontal lobe.
Yeah.
Like, what might you be balancing out? What instinctual behaviors might that frontal lobe say, slow down into a response as a reaction, as opposed to reaction?
Yes.
I think
that's right.
Would be worth exploring that. I was pleased to learn that.
Yeah. I wish I knew enough to give a talk about dolphins and whales. I mean, I just think they're so fascinating. I might actually take up the studying them, but and they really inspire me with humility. And I think we're just these clever chimps, but they're really, maybe they have wisdom that is beyond anything we can, understand. Yeah.
It really annoys me quite often when people talk about low forms of life and high forms of life. It just amazes me how blind they are, how ignorant. I've seen far more intuition and sensitivity in dogs, for instance.
Yeah.
When you get, when people are attached to them, there's almost like a symbiotic relationship.
Oh, really?
They don't have to be physically close. They have this intuition.
Yes.
So there's far more that's happening than we give credit.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Does that come from a fact that we try to intellectualize things? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we had a very strange occurrence when I was in Dharamsala with a group, and this dog, as they do over there, befriended our group.
Yeah.
And just stayed with our group no matter where we were going.
Yeah.
We were on this little tour, and it sat outside the temple. In some of them, it actually came in and sat inside the temple door, and it just knew that it was fine, and it didn't woof and bark and all the rest of it. It just sat. And then when we went down, and then as we were coming out, we were almost finishing our tour. A group of other dogs came up and started really having a go at this dog. And suddenly all us as humans went, well, we're not having that. He's part of our tribe now. So we actually surrounded the dog and did a sort of a go off, you get off and go off, you're down your own sort of thing, and protected the dog. So it was almost like he'd become part of our little group. For those maybe 2 or 3 hours that we were on this little tour about and talk about. And even when somebody was giving a talk, it would just sit really quietly. We all reckoned he'd been here before and was possibly a monk before and was just enjoying it. But it was interesting because he became part of our family, our tribe as such. And I don't know whether we became dogs or he became a human, but we were certainly
possibly.
episode, which was really interesting. Yeah.
Yes, very interesting. So there's a lot on that. There's a book actually. I haven't got very far with it yet, but I just was magnetized by the title, and it's by a very eminent expert in animal behavior called Frans de Waal. I don't know if anybody knows about him, but he is very extremely eminent scientist. And the book's called "Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?" And basically the answer is no, we're not. You know, we've been for a century or more, psychologists have been experimenting on animals and, you know, passing judgment on their intelligence or lack of it. And he's saying, well, no, actually, we don't know. You know, elephants are another very, very fascinating species, you know, that have comparable intelligence. I think they definitely have greater emotional intelligence than humans, or certainly most humans. They are, yeah, they're very interesting, and they also are able to be aware of things. They can, an elephant, they communicate through sound, through, you know, drumming on the ground. And they can hear and understand these communications from a distance of about 100 miles. They have extraordinary perception of lots of different kinds. And yeah, so I wish I knew more about it. My mother was a real expert on behavior. She could give you a wonderful talk about it. In fact, she probably has given many wonderful talks. I don't know how many of them are available on the internet, but you probably can find some interesting talks by her about this, actually. But I don't know that much about it. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Yatin, you know. But I just want to say a little bit in defense of more conventional view, you know. There is an evolutionary trajectory that goes from, we have to say, very, very simple single-celled organisms, or you know, proto-bacteria, and then there is this increasing level of sophisticated organization of the organism, so that even though, but it's been greatly exaggerated. Bacteria, for example, there is this is something I don't know a lot about, but it would probably be interesting to find out about. Some scientists say they build cities. Yeah? They have bacterial colonies which are highly structured, and different parts of those colonies have different functions, and they communicate, and they have a little, you know, internal kind of economy, things like that. So even these supposedly very primitive organisms, there may be a lot more going on than we think. But there is nevertheless, you know, there is some sense in which you can say that a human being in some aspects is more evolutionary advanced than, say, a dog. But that doesn't mean that, you know, dogs cannot have, yeah, like you say, very, you know, great sensitivity, intuitive awareness, empathy. They have compassion, they're capable of compassion. And humans often, although they have those potentials within them, they are often blocked because we are struggling with how to use this complex brain that we have. And this fact, now I'm sure the reason why it's so divided, it is a reason, a deep reason for that. But it presents us with deep problems that we somehow have to surmount those problems. We have to overcome those problems, perhaps through our social and cultural evolution and our collective consciousness. Then perhaps we can, you know, but there is a problem with kind of having a class, you know, hierarchy of humans being better than animals. And that, of course, isn't how we should think. Yeah.
Well, actually, as human beings, we rely most heavily on bacteria.
Oh yeah.
To digest our food and actually to be present here right now.
Yes.
Without the bacteria, we wouldn't be existent. So
that's true.
And the fact that if we have imbalances within the gut of different bacteria against other bacteria and so-called bad bacteria and good bacteria, how that actually can affect the thinking before you even become aware of the right side or left side creativity. and I think this is an interesting thing in today's dietary of level of the planet, how the industry of food makers have made around making money rather than making healthy people is a bit of a concerning sense of if we're reliant on that. I know it's gone off on a big divergent here, but the fact that
not at all.
You know, it could be fueling negative things or positive things, or we need to have clarity to be able to move through and beyond these systems that are in place that are actually working and weakening our foundations as humanity and of the planet itself, of the soil. And
yes, that's right. And so, you know, that cultural evolution I was talking about, how we need to learn as a society to work in a more integrated way, left brain, right brain, but at the same time, and equally, by the same token, we need to integrate with, you know, the rest of the ecosystem, and that you know, change in consciousness has to go along with things like, you know, and a healthier diet goes along with more natural methods of agriculture, you know, changing, you know, over-industrialization being reversed. You know, all this is symptoms of an out of balance consciousness and an out of balance way of living and way of being. So they're all, you know, it's a holistic picture, isn't it? You know, our minds and our physical activities and our societies and our political systems, all of these somehow need to change their quality to one that is more integrative and more interconnected and more compassionate and more, you know, holistic. Okay. So, well, that's been a very interesting discussion. We're coming to the end of our time. I guess, you know, we'd perhaps like to finish by 4, and I thought maybe we'd finish with some meditation. So yes, let's do that. I'm going to pause the recording and then record this meditation separately, I think.